All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Reddy. I'm the program director here at YEP. I'm excited to welcome you to tonight's session. For those of you that may be joining us for the first time, YEP is a nonprofit organization focused on inspiring, educating, and empowering the Ethiopian professional community to be able to make a positive impact in the work. We do this through different programs, events, and outreach, both in person and virtual. And tonight, as part of our Diaspora Engagement Program, we're bringing you a presentation on employment-related immigration pathways and laws. We have here with us Shirley Tang, who will share critical information and updates that will help you navigate the different paths. A little introduction on Shirley. Shirley is a partner at Cohen, Tauber, Spivak, and Wagner, PC in New York. She has more than 25 years of experience in advising business executives, talent managers, on employment-based immigration, recruitment, in the healthcare, pharmaceutical, IT, finance, manufacturing, and hospitality fields. Shirley is an active American Immigration Lawyers Association, and she serves on several different committees to promote advocacy, ethics, practice management. She's a frequent speaker on immigration matters at professional associations, and she's also a frequent speaker here at YEP. So Shirley, we're very happy to have you back, have your time and expertise this evening. For attendees, as the presentation progresses, please feel free to drop your questions in the comments, and we'll be sure to them as the presentation goes on and also toward the end of the presentation. So with that said, I'll go ahead and bring Shirley on. Shirley, welcome.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me back to your YEP network event. I enjoyed it immensely last year, and I'm very happy to be back to see familiar faces and to share my knowledge of immigration pathways for non-citizens. So before we get started, I will just take a few moments to cover some basic immigration concepts. I like to call it alphabet soup because oftentimes there's acronyms that are out there. There's letters associated with different visas. So I'd like to just spend a few moments talking about that because I'm sure the audience, everyone is at a different level of knowledge. So I want to make sure this is for everybody. So there are two types of visas that are used in the immigration space. There's the immigrant visa, which is the green card sponsored by employers, by siblings, family members, spouses. And then there's the non-immigrant visa, which is the alphabet soup, and that's where each alphabet letter is attached to a specific purpose. So, for example, you have F1, which is a student visa. You have the business visa, which is a B1. You have the tourist, which is a B2, and so on and so forth. And it goes all the way up from A, which is the diplomats, all the way up to, I think there's a U visa, which is for victims of criminal activity, witnesses of criminal activity. In fact, there's a S visa for those who are witnesses to crimes, and there's a T visa for victims of trafficking. So it's basically all the alphabets covered with the immigration realm. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to speak about F1 visas, which is a very common way for non-citizens to enter the United States. And their purpose of coming here is to study a degree program. Sometimes it's for a bachelor's degree, sometimes it's high school, and sometimes it's for a master's and above. And there's also the M visa, which is for vocational. So those are shorter programs, and they get like a 2-year program mainly. But F1s are generally a 4-year degree or high school, it's 4 years high school, or a master's program or a PhD, and sometimes even beyond PhD. So oftentimes when a F1 student completes the program, they get 1 year of optional practical training. It's called OPT. And OPT allows the student to work in the field of study for 1 year, for 12 months. And in that 12 months, the employer perhaps will agree to sponsor the individual for a longer term visa. And we'll segue into the H-1B and talk about the lottery in a bit, but generally the transition of an F1 student starts with F1, transition to optional practical training or OPT, and then transitions to H-1B. And we will talk about the H-1B and the lottery a little bit later. But for now, the OPT allows the individual to work for 12 months following graduation in the field of their study. So if they studied music, perhaps they would work in a school as a music teacher or a performer or musician. However, they would not be working in a marketing field. For example, if somebody has a music degree, it's unlikely that they will be working as a market research analyst. So the degree must match the job, and the school will make sure of that. The designated school official will ensure that the student is working in the field of study. So it's 1 year, it's not a lot of time. And being that the H-1B program is in such short supply, oftentimes the student will have the opportunity to work for a longer period if two conditions are met. And those conditions are if the student studied a STEM program, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, and if they study the STEM program, and the second condition that must be met is if the employer is registered or enrolled in E-Verify. With that combination, the student will have the ability to extend their OPT for an additional 24 months. And that's often advantageous, again, because of the short supply of H-1Bs. The individual will have a total of 3 years to work following completion of their degree. And that's often helpful to enable the individual to work longer and to establish more relationships in the United States with employers. Outside of the OPT and the STEM OPT timeframe extension, there's also curricular practical training, which allows a student who has completed at least 1 full year of a degree program to participate in sort of like an externship. They're allowed to be paid. They can work up to 20 hours a week during the school year and full-time 40 hours a week during holidays and school breaks. So that's also a very good program in order for the student to gain knowledge and theoretical and practical experience in their field of study. However, there's a caveat that the student must not exceed their CPT, the full-time CPT or curricular practical training for more than a year, because then it would disqualify them from qualifying for the OPT following graduation. So it's important to track how much time the student spends in CPT while they're enrolled. So let's now turn to make some comments about the H-1B lottery. So let's switch over to the H-1 lottery. Any questions so far on the non-immigrant basics? I don't see anything, so I'll move on to H-1.
I did have one question, Shirley.
Yes.
Is there a grace period upon graduation before you can qualify or have to enter the H-1B program, or is it immediate graduation?
It's 30 days.
30 days.
Yes. And the individual, and if there is an unemployment time, there is 90 days that's allowed under, let me just double check that. Yes, so there is allowed unemployment during the OPT of 90 days during the F1 OPT, and then 150 days for the STEM OPT extension. So, but I will just double check that and make sure that I am giving you the correct information. So it is, let me just grab that information here. Let me just pull that over here. unemployment counter. So be wary of that. And the workaround around to get around the unemployment period is the individual can be volunteering for a short time. They can be volunteering, and unpaid internship is fine, and so long as it's in their field of study. Okay, so yes, so post completion 90 days for OPT, and then for the STEM extension, the one with the 3 years, it's 150 days. So, but 20 hours a week is fine. And then if the individual really cannot find any work, they can start working for themselves on projects. Like they can contact, in addition to volunteering 20 hours a week, they can also work independently. And because they have an employment authorization card, they can take on projects and say, hey, you know, they have a friend in a IT business, they can do some consulting. So there are kind of workarounds in order to ameliorate any type of, like, say, downturn in the economy. They were offered a job and then it's been rescinded because there's been cutbacks or reduction in force. So there are workarounds to allow the student to volunteer. Okay, so that's F1. So let's move on to the H1B, which is a whole lot of fun because it's a lottery process and there is no particular formula. The clients often ask me, how do I increase my chances of being selected for the lottery? Well, probably it's just to make sure you do it right the first time. Follow the rules. Retain counsel. It's very important because the immigration system is not particularly sophisticated. It's a little more cumbersome than it is sophisticated. So their 2FA authentication is convoluted and kind of disruptive because you have to have the employer with you or accessible in order to give you the code to enter. So it becomes a little bit cumbersome. But let me explain the process pre-2020. So pre-2020, it was the applications. Any employer that wanted to sponsor an H-1B worker had to submit in the entire application and pay the fee. So the month of March, we called it March Madness because every immigration lawyer was just inundated with filing as many H-1Bs for employers as possible and to be received by immigration on April 1st. So those were the days when FedEx would be lined up at immigration all the way down, like there would be 150 trucks of FedEx with all the applications that every lawyer in the country, immigration lawyer, has prepared and filed with immigration. And then with those cases, immigration would then run a lottery on those cases that were submitted to the immigration and delivered to immigration. That lasted about 10 years, that process. In 2020, immigration decided to, let's simplify this. Let's do a registration of any employer that wants to file an H-1B for an employee or an H-1B worker. They can register with immigration on their on the U.S. immigration's platform. The first year they charge $15, and you had to submit the name, passport number, nothing about the job offer, nothing about salary, what degree they had, whether they qualified under a U.S. master's degree or whether they had a degree from abroad. And the employer had to provide their tax ID number, the address, where the individual worked, and the contact information. So it was very kind of low-key, low-maintenance type of process, which seemed a good idea because we didn't have to deal with March Madness as much. So what happened was the first year immigration got, they did a lottery and it worked out in that it was 2020, it was the pandemic. A lot of employers submitted the registration, then realized that they had to cut back because businesses were shut down, businesses were shuttered. And so that year, 2020, immigration found it hard to meet the quota. The quota is 65,000 H-1Bs for what we call the regular cap. And the regular cap is for individuals with bachelor's degrees, both foreign degrees or US bachelor's degrees. And there's an additional allocation of 20,000 H-1Bs that are reserved for US graduates of US master's or higher programs. So if you had, so total is 85,000 visas available. In the year 2020, immigration had to run the lottery 3 times in order to make that quota, which is unusual, but it was 2020. 2021, there was only one lottery, and 2022, there was only one lottery. And then here we are, 2023, we just had the lottery on March 1st. And interestingly enough, the selection rate was extremely low. And the reason for that is because immigration received over 780,000 registrations. Plus, now it only costs $10 per registration. With the same information, just need the employer information, need the non-citizens information and passport. And it's $10 was nothing compared to the large fees that they had to pay in the past. 780,000, of which 400,000 were for multiple registrations for the same individual. So the way the system works is that the same company cannot submit 2 or more registrations for the same employee to increase their odds. So it only allows for 1 employer per employee. However, that doesn't stop that employee from contracting or asking other employers to file for them. So in fact, it's gaming the system, because then you have 15 companies filing for the same individual, which increases their chances by 15 over the one that has this one submission. But what became apparent is that of 400,000 of the 700,000 were for multiple registrations for the same employee, the same individual. And it turned out that once the individual was picked by these random companies, the companies would say, you pay me $25,000 and I'll file it for you. So it became like an extortion almost. And these exorbitant fees were charged. And so ultimately, none of those 400,000 wind up submitting any H-1Bs. And so immigration wound up having to do a second lottery last month, in July, in order to make the 85,000. So it's pretty startling that you have 780,000, and yet out of the 700,000, they couldn't receive 85,000 H-1Bs out of that pool, which is huge. So the practice of having multiple companies file for the same individual has kind of undermined the integrity of the lottery. And so immigration is now reassessing whether or not 2024's lottery, which happens in March, is going to be a little different. Maybe higher fees, maybe a little bit more commitment for maybe just 1 employee per individual. Maybe that's it. So it remains to be seen how that is going to play out. So with regard to H-1Bs, any questions so far?
I just had one. So related to high school, is there a lottery specifically for them? You only mentioned bachelor's and master's.
For what, high school graduates?
Yes.
High school graduates would not qualify for H-1B visa. It would have, the H-1 visa is reserved strictly for graduates of bachelor's degree programs or higher. And the other caveat is that the degree must be related to the occupation. So in terms of like engineering field, if somebody is working as a construction engineer or a civil engineer, then they would have a civil engineering degree. That's an easy correlation. Teacher, lawyer, architect, doctor, those are the easy ones. The harder ones are the business related jobs. Like you have somebody who is working as a, let's say a business analyst or a business intelligence analyst, and they have a MBA in finance. there is correlation, but it's not exactly straightforward because immigration in the past, during the Trump years, it was a lot more difficult. There was a lot more scrutiny on the H-1Bs. There's since have rolled back that scrutiny and so there's a lot less pushback by immigration. So long as you can establish that there is a correlation between the degree and the job, and there is typically employers do require this degree in order to do this job, then cases generally get approved. But it's still an issue to demonstrate that there is a relationship between, or a nexus between, the job and the degree.
Yeah, that's going to be my question. I know in business, a specific job components that fall into maybe finance, so there may not always be fit. But what sort of documentation would you have to show that alignment outside of job?
Oftentimes, for those that are not exactly straightforward, it's oftentimes it helps to have other job postings. Like you go on Indeed and you say, okay, what does it generally require? For example, let's say a business intelligence analyst or a market research analyst. If someone has a marketing degree, that is not too far apart, right? But if you have someone who is a statistician and they have an economics degree, that matches. But if you have somebody who's working as a statistician and they have an engineering degree, then it becomes a little bit more complicated, although you can probably make it work if you are able to show that engineering has concepts of statistical analysis, maybe the tool they're building or the item that they're making is actually related to an engineering, mechanical wise, and you need the statistics to kind of make sure that its structure holds up. So things like that, it's about being creative. It's about documenting what the industry requires. So sometimes we've reached out to business entities to say, like business associations, to say, okay, we ask the individual to say, are you a member of any organizations and do you have any contact? And that helps. Or you get a professor. We've been successful with getting a professor to vouch for the fact that this degree is related to this field. This professor has been teaching for 20 years, 30 years. His students have been in this field. Students who graduate from his program have wound up in these fields, and this one is one of them. So there's ways to explain and justify how your degree is related to the position.
And the council will help with this station, right?
The what?
The council that you retain.
Yes, they're supposed to help you with making sure that, and that's the first thing that I look at when the company contacts me and says, we have this individual, what do you think? So I will look at the resume, and for example, I had a inquiry the other day it was under the Canadian visa, and I'll go into that in a bit. The Canadian citizens qualify for the NAFTA, under the old NAFTA, which is now the USMCA, for specific jobs. And one of the jobs is a chemist. And my client asked me, he says, oh, we have this job description, the job that requires a chemistry degree, but the job is more of a proposal. They're managing proposals. And I'm like, well, I don't see that they're doing anything in the laboratory. So in that case, I told them, no, you can't, it doesn't match. The chemistry degree may be required to understand the job, but if you have employees who have non-chemistry degrees and still doing this job, that means that this job doesn't necessarily require a chemistry degree. So that's the kind of explanation. Then sometimes you just have to tell the client, no, this may not work. If you want to take a risk, these are the risks, and these are the chances of success. And sometimes the cases that you think are going to be a low chance of success actually succeeds because you made a good argument. And so it's, the counsel that you hire they're supposed to make the argument for you. And you can help. I always welcome from clients. I welcome because of their connections to, and the savviness and with research. And I always ask, I say, if you find anything that is helpful to your case, whether it's a contact you have, a professor I'm all for it. I believe in that, in incorporating as much help as possible and input from the client in order to get their case, because they have a stake. Everyone has a stake in the case. Okay, so any other questions on the H-1B?
I'm not seeing questions, but I did get a comment around echoing, so I'll be sure to mute on Shirley's end to just make sure everyone can hear me clearly. But I'll go ahead and let you continue.
Okay, got it. All right. Okay, so H-1Bs, we've talked about the second lottery that was done. Let's talk about what happens when the individual doesn't get picked in the lottery. It's actually quite heartbreaking because some of my clients have tried 3-4 years to get an H-1B under the lottery, and they do it right. One registration, one employer, one registration. And it's heartbreaking because they see their friends get it, and it becomes demoralizing. And so I like to explore other options that they can perhaps explore, take advantage of. So one of the things that has been kind of on the rise is working for an employer that is not subject to the cap. And these include organizations such as nonprofit research organizations, like think tanks. In the DC area, think tanks, there's think tanks for every topic, right? And the issue, though, with think tanks and nonprofits is budget. They often don't have a budget for hiring, sponsoring foreign workers. But it is an option, and it's becoming a very popular practice because if you can get hired by a nonprofit research organization or a nonprofit university or hospital, then there is an opportunity to concurrently work for a private employer that is subject to the cap. It's a bit of a loophole, but there are some organizations that are focusing and making this available to individuals who didn't make the cap. As an aside, I know that with regard to the lottery, this just came to mind, that Canadian immigration, there's been a big push by Canadian immigration saying that if you didn't make the lottery, the US lottery, come to us. So that's been a big push from Canada because they need talent. But focusing on the nonprofit research organizations, they have to be in research, and it doesn't have to be scientific. It can be in social research. It can be in education. So long as they are a nonprofit organization, and oftentimes this is supported by their charter, by the board, the articles of incorporation. We ask for white papers, research papers, collaborations with universities. So the nice thing about that is that if you are able to work in for a nonprofit research organization on an H-1B, cap exempt, you can simultaneously be petitioned by a private employer that is subject to the cap without having to go through the lottery. So this is a little bit of a loophole that there is an organization that is doing this for people, and it's been very helpful. And if you're interested, I'll be happy to share that information with you outside in the private chat or in the comments as you need. Other alternatives to the H-1B include, so I did talk about, I know that most of the audience today that are listening may be of Ethiopian descent, but there may be dual nationals. So dual nationals is something that I always ask about, is that if you have any chance you're a citizen of another country, or you hold a passport of another country. And sometimes, once in a while, I get a yes. So Canadians, for example, and I mentioned earlier, Canadians, citizens, or Mexican citizens have the the visa is called the TN. And the TN visa is reserved for Canadian and Mexican nationals. And there are a limited number of jobs that are on the TN occupation list, but at least it's another option to look at. Australians they have a visa called the E3. And it's very similar to the H-1B, but there's no quota. So Australians can come in on an E3 visa, very easy. It takes literally 30 days. You still have to justify that the job is related to the field that they're working in, but it doesn't go through nearly as long a process, and you don't go through a selection process. So if anybody's interested in getting dual Australian citizenship, I can't help with that, but I know somebody who can. And last one that has another visa that is not subject to the cap is Singapore and Chile. So Singaporeans have the H-1B1, and Chilean nationals have the H-1B1 as well. So if the H-1B doesn't work out, you can't find an H-1 cap exempt employer, perhaps these other nationalities will be helpful if there's an opportunity for that. Other alternatives are Ethiopia is on the treaty for the E visa. It's been a treaty country since 1956 or 1958. And it's a treaty of trade and commerce that the US has with Ethiopia and a whole host of other countries. And it's a diplomatic relationship, and it promotes trade and commerce. So if someone who didn't make the lottery, but would like to perhaps establish their own business in the United States, and they have a product that you can sell here, whether it's a service such as technology that's developed overseas in Ethiopia and brought here to the United States to sell, or it's a commodity, a good, a product. And if that's an opportunity for the individual to be an entrepreneur and work in their own company and hire Americans. And that's the whole idea, is that it's a treaty of trade and commerce, but also is an opportunity for this individual to become an entrepreneur and to hire Americans. That's the whole idea. And a subset of this E visa is the E2, which is an investor visa. The E2 is the investor, meaning that they want to buy a restaurant. You want to buy like an Airbnb, or you want to buy a hotel or small business, mostly restaurants. I have a lot of clients in the restaurant industry, and they have E2s. I know a lawyer who's on an E2. He's opened his own law firm, which is amazing, right? So the thing is capital, though. E2 does require capital. So if there is that opportunity to invest money in the United States, whatever business it is, let's say it's an AI business, it's kind of low startup cost. You need heavy duty equipment like a big server, but you don't need a whole lot of inventory. That you could probably get away with, maybe a consulting AI business, maybe 50, 60,000. But it does take capital. So I just want to let everyone know that the E1, E2 is an opportunity should the H-1B not be available. The other option I see also is an O1. An O1 is an individual with extraordinary ability. I mean, it's like a talent visa. So oftentimes you see it for athletes. You see it for soccer players. I've done it for soccer players. What do you call it? Bodybuilder. So bodybuilder, I've done it for soccer coaches and track and field. So athletes can be the O1, but also if somebody has a skill, like has a PhD in biochemistry and has published, has a number of publications, is a journal reviewer, If they have a patent, then that's a visa that may be available to the individual. It is a high level, it's a high achievement level visa. And it's not available to everybody, but it is out there. Also, it's J1 visa intern or trainee. That's generally not available if the individual has already used up the time on the student visa OPT. Because the whole idea of the J1 is to obtain training in the United States and then to bring it back to your home country. So if the individual has already exhausted the time on F1 OPT, then the J1 is not for them. However, it is sometimes an opportunity for an employer who is interested in hiring talent from overseas to kind of try out the individual and bring them to the United States and train them for, as a trainee, they can come for 18 months and learn the skill. And during that time, should the employer decide that they want to file an H-1B registration for them, they can do that. They have the right to do that. It's not the purpose of the J1, and it's the J1 strictly for training, but it is an available option, but it's not an option for someone who's already obtained training in the United States. And lastly, the last visa that's a last alternative to the H-1B is if they've exhausted the OPT and the OPT STEM and they're still waiting for next year's lottery round, then I have also clients who opt for continuation of their studies into another program. They enroll in a program that allows for CPT, curricular practical training, on day one. And that it's expensive. There's a lot of universities that's capitalizing on it. It used to be only 2 universities in the country. Now there's like 5 or 6 or more, because that the CPT will allow the individual to enroll in a master's program. Let's say the already individual has a master's in business administration, and now they're working in the technology field, and now they want to get a second degree in informatics. Well, they can enroll in this university that allows for CPT on day one, work and continue working for the employer for a few more years. Usually takes about 2 years to finish this second master's. In the meantime, it just increases their time here, increases their ability for their employer to file an H-1B for them in the lottery. So it is a long game, the H-1B. If you don't get it the first year, you try to get it the second year. If you don't get it the second year, you go for the third year on STEM OPT. And if that doesn't work, then go on to CPT, or try other visas, O1, E1, E2. So there are other options out there should the H-1B not work out. So any questions so far?
I had a quick one. So you kind of addressed it, but it seems like the number of times you can register for the lottery is based on how long you can extend your OPT or get CPT. Is that correct?
Right, that's right. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't be overseas and be, but if individuals, usually they have invested a lot of time here, and there is no limit. But the limit is how long can you stay in the United States in lawful status. You have to be in lawful status in order to gain the chance to be selected in the lottery.
Are there cases where it might be more advantageous to pursue another visa as opposed to going to the H-1B, or is it always recommended that you go directly there first and essentially try the lottery system first?
Considering the low selection rate on the H-1B, I think that it's always good to explore other options before going down the path of the H-1B. H-1B is a backup to me because of the low selection rate. In round 1 of the lottery this year, the selection rate was about 17 to 18%. Round 2 of the lottery, the chances got a little bit better, maybe 25 to 30. but still the odds aren't great, right? The odds aren't great. So, all right. So that concludes the work visa options. We can turn to permanent residency at this point because generally that is the goal. The goal is coming to the United States, work here temporarily to get a work visa, and then eventually get permanent residency. So permanent residency, the U.S. immigration system is based on employer sponsorship or family sponsorship. And, and excuse me. There is also a national interest waiver that is available for an individual who has what's called exceptional ability. So in usually the cases, the employer sponsors the individual, but it does take a long time. The current processing time for a labor certification that goes to the Department of Labor is roughly 2.5 years. That's because along the way, every step, I always tell clients, I said, there's nothing fast about any step of this, any part of this process. There's nothing fast about it. I especially tell that to my Indian national clients who have a much longer wait than other countries. Indian nationals have to wait roughly 10 or more years, which is shocking, but it is the reality. And so the general, for the general population, the process does take 2.5 to 3 years because every step takes, like the first step of if you were to do a labor certification, which is a process that is done through the Department of Labor, the first step of the case takes 6 months, and that's just to request what's called a prevailing wage. And you generally can't do anything while you're waiting for that prevailing wage. There's no expedite, there's no premium processing, there's nothing that will accelerate. It's first in, first out. And then when the case goes to the Department of Labor to be submitted, the Department of Labor is taking about 12 months. So there's just long, every step is long and tedious. And so a lot of employees are looking at other pathways to get their green card. And if they have a science background, if they've published, if they've gotten some awards or patents, they may consider an NIW and not a national interest waiver. You see this a lot I see this a lot in the science industry, the pharma industry, when someone is a researcher of cell biology, doing cancer research on Alzheimer's, they oftentimes have the ability to get an NIW if they can show that they have certain criteria. They have a degree, they've got many publications, they've got patents. So it's a popular way for individuals to explore other options to a green card. And then of course there's the family base, marriage to a U.S. citizen, marriage to a green card holder. But all that does require the individual to stay in the United States legally. Any questions on green cards so far?
I do encourage everyone tuning in, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll be sure to address it.
All right. And so as far as green card is concerned, okay, so we talked a little bit about the process of getting a green card. There's several options for the employment side. The employment side, generally it's done through the Department of Labor, through a labor certification. But there are also individuals who have a high level of achievement. They can be an extraordinary ability. Earlier, I talked about the O1 being an option for someone who has notoriety or publications to get a temporary work visa as an O1. Well, on the immigrant visa side, there's the extraordinary ability green card, that's a very high standard. it's basically immigration says that if you haven't won the Nobel Prize, don't bother, pretty much. Not necessarily don't bother, but it's a very high level of achievement. And they come back with requests for evidence that are like 15 pages long. So it's not easy to get, but it's been done. If someone is a CEO who has transformed businesses around the world, sometimes that works. But the majority of employers that employ the individuals that get sponsored for green cards get it through the labor certification. That's the majority, unfortunately, and that is why the backlog is so long at the Department of Labor. So that concludes my presentation on the immigration pathways. I do want to touch on I-9s, which is a fairly new, something new happened recently. It's a hot topic, and anyone who is in the audience who is tuning in might be in human resources or a business owner or a entrepreneur who has employees. This is something that you should be aware of, that as of August 1st, immigration rolled out a new form. They want all employers to start using that new form. During COVID, immigration kind of said, all right, we'll relax the rules because no one's in the office. So they started allowing for remote verification of documents, remote examination of documents. Though that all came to an end on July 31st of this year. And so immigration said that all employers have until August 30th to review in person, do physical inspection of documents that were inspected remotely during the years of the pandemic. And that's a lot. That's a lot of employees, especially since a lot of companies went remote, fully remote. And so immigration has kind of said, okay, they've relaxed the rules, say, okay, if you can't get it done by August 30th, get it done as soon as possible. So that is currently the new I-9 rule. And the one exception is that employers who are enrolled in E-Verify may continue to verify documents remotely. So I think bottom line is there's a lot of benefits to enrolling in E-Verify. And for those who are not aware of what that program is, it is a very easy system. It's a USCIS, U.S. immigration platform that it serves as like a double check system. It doesn't exempt an employer from completing the I-9, but it does help the employer to identify mismatch issues. I recently had a case where the individual was on an H-1B, but the employer kept getting the non-confirmation because there was a typo or a swap or transposed digits on their social security number. And all it was a typo. So E-Verify alerts employers to the ability that there might be a mismatch or there might be a typo. So that therefore it's not a reason to terminate an individual. It's just a reason to go back and verify your documents. So it is a very popular program. I think there's a lot of employers who are registered for that now. Okay, with that, I am done with the presentation. Just 10 minutes for questions if there are any.
Great. I do have one that I'm going to go ahead and pull up to the screen. So, of course, you're presenting tonight from the council's perspective, but for one that may have graduated with a degree in Ethiopia, are there resources from your previous experiences that they could use to find companies that are more agreeable or willing to sponsor employees?
Yeah, so this is a great question. One of the problems that were identified with the lottery, with the 780,000 registrations, of which 400,000 were submitted by multiple employers for the same individual. There was some talk about how employers were targeting using LinkedIn to look for any individual that had a foreign name with a degree in tech. And they went specifically and said, "Are you interested in submit in an H-1B? First of all, do you need an H-1B? And are you interested in us submitting a registration for you?" That's how it all started. So I'd say that, how do you find companies that will be agreeable? If you graduated, so the individual that's asking this question, are there online resources to find companies? No, I mean, I wouldn't trust any like headhunters or manpower organizations because they charge an exorbitant fee. LinkedIn is a good networking tool. It really is, because employers do scour those for specific talent. And if you post your resume on LinkedIn, when you have a special skill, it's actually a good tool for employers because they are looking. And with the current job shortage, employers are scrambling for talent. And what they're finding is that talent is, it's the employee that is got the bargaining power, because they often have multiple offers, and they're going to choose the one that's bigger, with a bigger offer. But I mean, I think that's the best way, is to use professional resources like LinkedIn, and perhaps even, I don't know, does Indeed allow you to post? I don't know. Does Indeed allow you to post a resume? I'm not sure. And word of mouth, that's always the best. I think word of mouth. But if Imran, if you please, maybe you want to type in the question, or what did you study?
And as we wait for his response as well, and anyone else that's tuning in, you may have questions. We still have a few minutes, so please feel free to drop that in the chat. Shirley, I wanted to ask, from your years of experience, of course, you talked a little bit about how, heartbreaking it could be going through the lottery process, not getting picked. A lot of these options or paths take a lot of time. So what are, 2 to 3 pieces of advice that you could share with someone that's preparing to go through this journey, and, helping them kind of see to the other side here?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people don't have the strategy in place. When they come here, it's a dream, right, to come to the United States to study. And what it's not realized is that 4 years later, or 3 years later, or 2 years later, after the degree, you think that, oh, okay, I can find a job. But what happens if you don't get the visa? So I guess the takeaway would be to go into this with the knowledge that it's a long road. It could be a long road. You could be lucky and be picked in the lottery on try number 1, right? But you could also be among the unlucky ones who don't get picked yet, but have to wait and spend more time in the United States. So I would advise you to have as much knowledge about the process as possible. Knowledge is power. And also go for a STEM major, because that gives you the additional time. So I do a lot of work in the healthcare space. And on the STEM list, physical therapy is right now is a doctorate program. But yet physical therapy is not on a STEM list, which is mind-boggling. But yet exercise science is on the STEM list. So I have a lot of clients that are graduating with exercise and kinesiology degrees because they know that they can get the STEM extension. So that's where to be knowledgeable about what you're studying, and does this major allow you to get that additional time to work here and to gain the experience and to gain the opportunity, so that you have more chances of getting picked in the lottery. So knowledge is really the takeaway. Know the process, know what degrees are beneficial, and just be aware of the risk and the long potential long road that this could be. And then is true love. Along the way, you may find true love, and marriage to a US citizen is an option for many, and they have. And I've represented a lot of clients who start here, come here on F1, get picked in the lottery, start working, have the employer even sponsor them, and then they find true love, and then they say, okay, I will decide whether or not. And even then, they say, I don't want to go through my spouse. I want to go through my work. So we have that option too.
Awesome. It seems like, as a follow-up on our previous question, that specific field was marketing. So if there were resources to that field.
Yeah, so marketing is very broad. It's very useful. It's a really great major to be in because it covers a lot of occupations. But it also is hard because it's a very popular US degree as well. So you have a lot of competition. So maybe go to like job fairs, sign up for job fairs that are virtual in marketing, sign up for, I don't know if there's virtual job fairs internationally, but maybe sign up for marketing conferences and try to attend one. And maybe that's a way to get yourself out there. Write an article, get it published in a marketing journal, get noticed. Perhaps that will allow employers to say, hey, this is a great idea. This is a really good concept. It's a really novel way of thinking. And that's maybe the way to do it. And word of mouth is really, call every contact, but go to conferences, go to seminars. Now that the world has opened up again, I think conferences are back on the scene, and that's probably a really good place to network.
Great. And it looks like we have one final question here related to what are the most common reasons for green card application denials for those that pursue it through their employer? And then a follow-up, what advice would you give regarding that specific question?
Yeah, there could be, it's like I said, it's a long road. And it's a great question because it is such a long road, and things can happen along the way. So, for example, most of the time I see any type of denial of a green card is due to some form of ineligibility, such as it could be a law enforcement issue, it could be an inadvertent misrepresentation that was made years ago and someone forgot about it, or someone else filled the papers for them and they didn't know what they put on there. So there could be reasons for that. But generally, your lawyer will do a full intake of your case before they take it. So the lawyer has to do a full scan of the history, ask the questions. Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever misrepresented any information? How did you get your visa? All of that information. And the other thing is the employer. One of the things that companies aren't always aware is that immigration along the process, not necessarily the first step, but somewhere in the middle, immigration requires the financials of the employer. And some employers will say, I'm not giving it out. I'm not giving out the tax return. And it's a shame because you've invested 2 years into the process only to find that out. Whereas it's the job of the attorney to advise the employer from the very beginning. This is your responsibility. You have to be willing to hand over your tax return and your financial reports to the immigration authorities. So that's where I see a lot of getting roadblocks in a way to the process. So again, back to the knowledge, knowing what the process is, having transparency with the employer. And it's not easy. It's not easy. Some employers are not willing to share information. And I run into that all the time with clients coming to me where their previous employer will not release documents because they don't want to share it. So I encourage transparency and full discussions with everybody to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Great. Yeah, those are amazing pieces of advice to take with us for those of us that may be getting ready to pursue that journey. So, Shirley, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise. We're so happy to have you back and hope to continue to do a lot of these sessions where we can share this great information. For our audience who attended and asked questions, thank you for your participation. We will look forward to doing more of these events, sharing the resources that are out there to make sure that you have what you need in this particular journey.
Since if anybody needs to contact me, or do they have the information? Do you want to type it out onto and share it with them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those that may need to reach us, you can always email us or follow us on all of our social medias. Our DMs are open. Email us, DM us with any questions, and we're happy to make connections to Shirley or really anyone else that we bring on to present as a subject matter expert.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.